The hall breathed. That was the first thing that unsettled him, though it took a while before he understood why. The walls were grown, not built, layered with translucent alloys that pulsed faintly in rhythm, like a giant organism politely pretending to be architecture. Every pulse sent a soft vibration through the floor and into his boots, as if the building were counting heartbeats and judging whether the guests deserved the effort of remaining solid. He told himself this was normal alien engineering, and that staring at walls like a confused tourist was not a good look, especially when he was the only human within several light years who hadn't been officially classified as furniture. The feast stretched across the hall in long, curving tables that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was looking. Plates hovered a respectful finger's width above their surfaces, rotating slowly to display food that glowed, steamed, or occasionally twitched. He tried not to flinch at the twitching ones. Around him, ambassadors and nobles from half the known galaxy laughed in carefully measured tones, their translators smoothing unfamiliar sounds into polite lies. Someone nearby told a joke about antimatter wine exploding if served warm. Everyone laughed a second too late, which meant it was hilarious by interstellar standards. At the center sat her. She looked almost human, enough that his brain kept trying to relax around her presence, and almost succeeded. The differences arrived just in time to stop that from happening. Her long ears swept back from her head in elegant arcs, expressive and sharp-edged, catching the ambient light and refracting it like polished crystal. Her posture suggested absolute comfort, the kind that came from knowing the room had been designed around you, not the other way around. When she smiled, it was restrained, as though she found the entire ceremony mildly amusing and was deciding how much mercy to show it. He was not supposed to be sitting this close. He had been told that very clearly in 3 languages and 1 series of threatening hand gestures. But a clerical error, a missing symbol, and a distracted official had placed him here, directly within conversational range of power. He considered apologizing preemptively, then decided that humans apologizing to alien rulers was how half their myth started. Servants glided between guests, their movements too smooth, too synchronized. One paused to adjust a dish near her place, hands steady, smile perfect. The man felt a prickle at the back of his neck, the familiar sensation of pattern recognition waking up and demanding attention like an unpaid intern. He leaned back, pretending to admire the ceiling, and muttered to himself that paranoia was a survival trait, not a personality flaw. The ceiling pulsed again, as if disagreeing. She lifted her gaze briefly, long ears tilting almost imperceptibly, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the noise of the hall softened. Then she smirked, just a little, and said something to the noble beside her that made him snort into his drink. The human didn't hear the words, but he recognized the tone. It was the universal sound of someone making fun of their own ceremony. That, somehow, made everything worse. The second course arrived without warning, which seemed to be a design philosophy rather than a mistake. The plates shifted position on their own, gliding closer to their intended recipients with the confidence of machines that had never been ignored. The human watched one pause in midair, recalibrate, then slide toward him anyway, as if deciding that close enough was a perfectly acceptable definition of correct. He stared at the food, something gelatinous, faintly luminous, and emitting a smell that reminded him of ozone having an argument with cinnamon, and wondered which branch of human evolution had failed to prepare him for this moment. Across the table, laughter rippled again. Not natural laughter, he decided, but ceremonial laughter. It arrived on cue, swelled to an approved volume, and died politely. Someone made a remark about gravity fluctuations during digestion, and several guests tapped their throats in a gesture that translated roughly to amusement and mild concern. The human smiled along, hoping his expression conveyed cultural respect rather than the truth, which was that his internal organs were quietly drafting a resignation letter. She accepted her dish with an elegant nod. Her long ears shifted, angling outward, a subtle signal he was starting to recognize as awareness rather than alarm. She examined the food with professional interest, as though it were a political rival disguised as dinner. When she spoke, her voice carried easily, warm and controlled, the sound of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Humans, she said, glancing briefly in his direction, are known for distrusting unfamiliar meals. Is that myth accurate, or merely a flattering rumor? Several heads turned. The human felt a dozen optical systems assess him, some organic, some definitely not. He cleared his throat. We distrust familiar meals too, he said. It's part of our charm. That earned a genuine laugh, short, sharp, and unplanned. Her ears flicked back in amusement. Then you are uniquely qualified to survive banquets, she replied. A valuable trait. Survive. The word settled uncomfortably in his mind. He lifted his utensil, which adjusted its shape to match his grip, and prodded the glowing mass. It recoiled slightly. He froze. The mass settled. He pretended that had been exactly what he expected. Somewhere behind him, a small drone hummed, recording atmospheric data and presumably his humiliation. As he leaned forward, a faint shimmer passed through the air, barely visible, like heat distortion. His translator hesitated, recalibrated, then fed him a half-second of static before resuming. He frowned. That shouldn't happen. The system was military-grade, designed to function inside pulsars and bureaucratic meetings. He glanced around, watching the servants move again, synchronized to a rhythm that didn't match the hall's pulse. One of them brushed too close to her place, adjusting nothing this time. She didn't look at them, but her ears shifted sharply backward, irritation flickering and vanishing. The human felt the prickle again, stronger now. He told himself it was nerves or hunger, or the fact that the food was still faintly twitching. He leaned back, lowering his voice. For what it's worth, he said, not sure why he was speaking at all, if this meal tries to escape, I'm blaming you. She smiled without looking at him. If it does, she said lightly, it will be the least treacherous thing in this room. The hall pulsed. Somewhere beneath the humor, something old and dangerous shifted, patient and very well fed. The final course did not arrive so much as announce itself. The air shifted first, pressure adjusting with a whisper that tickled the inner ear, followed by a synchronized dimming of the hall's living walls. Conversations tapered off, laughter resolving into reverent silence with practiced ease. The tables stilled, plates locking into place as if magnetized by tradition. Somewhere deep within the structure, a low harmonic tone resonated, ancient and satisfied, like a machine remembering a promise. The human's plate warmed beneath his hands. That alone was wrong. Earlier dishes had been cool, carefully neutral, but this one radiated heat that wasn't thermal so much as biological. His translator flickered again, this time long enough for him to notice a faint overlay of warning symbols that vanished before he could focus on them. He swallowed, dry-throated, and glanced toward her. She sat perfectly still, eyes on the dish before her. Her long ears were angled forward now, alert in a way that felt instinctive rather than ceremonial. Around them, servants withdrew in precise unison, retreating to the edges of the hall. Guards adjusted their stances. No one spoke. The humor that had buoyed the evening evaporated, leaving behind the brittle seriousness of something irreversible. He leaned back slightly, tapping the edge of his plate with one finger. A tiny spark of energy crawled across the surface, then disappeared into the food. That did it. His mind snapped pieces together with unwelcome clarity, archived texts, ritual language, selection myths disguised as honor. He let out a short, incredulous laugh before he could stop himself. It sounded far too loud. Several heads turned. She glanced at him, one eyebrow lifting, her ears twitching in what might have been curiosity or a warning to remain quiet. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, whispering fiercely to himself about not starting an interstellar incident over dinner. His heart pounded hard enough that he wondered if the hall could feel it. A voice, someone's, began reciting ceremonial words, heavy with reverence and finality. The human stopped listening. He was watching her hands now, how relaxed they were, how unaware. Humor surfaced in his panic, absurd and unstoppable. If he was going to die, at least he'd go down as the rudest guest in galactic history. He stood. The chair dissolved beneath him, reacting to the unexpected movement. Gasps rippled outward. The ceremonial voice faltered. For one surreal moment, everyone simply stared at the human standing where no one was meant to stand. "Well," he said, too loudly, then winced. "This is awkward." Her eyes widened just slightly. Her ears snapped fully forward. He took a breath that tasted like ionized air and regret. "Don't eat," he shouted, the words tearing free before fear could stop them. "Don't eat. They're trying to kill you." The hall froze. Sound collapsed into a vacuum so complete it rang. Utensils hovered mid-fall. The harmonic tone cut out abruptly, like a song yanked from memory. Dozens of weapons targeted him without firing. Someone choked on a laugh that never finished forming. She did not move. Then slowly, deliberately, she raised one hand, signaling stillness. Her gaze never left him, long ears rigid with focus. When she spoke, her voice was calm enough to terrify him. "Human," she said softly, "you have just interrupted destiny." He swallowed and managed a crooked grin. "Yeah," he said, "we do that." Time did not resume so much as inch forward, reluctantly, as if offended by what had just happened. The weapons remained trained on the human, humming softly, their targeting systems adjusting for the inconvenient fact that he was still breathing. He resisted the urge to raise his hands too quickly. He'd learned from experience that sudden movements tended to inspire lasers. Instead, he lifted one finger slowly, like someone about to make a point in a meeting rather than derail an empire. "Before anyone disintegrates me," he said, voice echoing far more than he'd intended, "I'd just like to note that this is statistically the worst place I could be wrong." A ripple passed through the hall, not laughter exactly, but the alien equivalent of it, a collective recalibration of tension. Someone muttered a phrase that his translator rendered as roughly typical primate. Another voice replied, "At least it's an honest one asterisk." She remained seated. That alone kept him alive. Her long ears shifted minutely, one angling toward a cluster of robed officials, the other toward him, as if she were listening to two different futures at once. "You accuse my hosts," she said evenly, "in the middle of a rite older than your species recorded mathematics." "True," he said, "but in my defense, math doesn't usually try to kill people." A few nobles gasped, one snorted. The ceremonial leader stepped forward, robes flaring with offended authority. "This human is ignorant of our ways," the figure declared. "The rite is sacred. The chosen dish carries honor, not death." The human tilted his head. "Then you won't mind if we test it." Silence again, denser this time. He hadn't planned to say that part out loud. His brain, apparently, had decided to sprint without consulting the rest of him. She tapped one finger against the table. The surface rippled, responding to her touch like water pretending to be solid. "Explain," she said. He exhaled. "There's a toxin in the final course," he said. "Not fast, not messy, something elegant. Something that lets everyone pretend it was fate instead of murder." He glanced at the robed figure. Very on brand, by the way. Outrage erupted sharp, clipped protests overlapping in multiple frequencies. Guards shifted. The harmonic tone began to creep back in, uncertain. Through it all she watched him, expression unreadable. "And how," she asked calmly, "would a human know this?" He shrugged. "I read the wrong archive once. And my translator's been acting weird all night, which it only does when something tries to scramble biochemical data." He gestured vaguely at the dish. "Also, the food just tried to absorb a diagnostic spark. That's never a good sign." A technician near the wall blinked, then frowned at their scanner. "That's not supposed to happen." The robed figure stiffened. "This is blasphemy." She stood. The hall reacted instantly, architecture brightening, systems realigning around her movement. When she spoke, the room listened. "Then we will commit blasphemy together," she said. "Pause the rite." Gasped protest, a few relieved sighs. She turned her gaze fully on the human. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, not in size but in certainty. "If you are lying," she said softly, "your death will be educational." He smiled weakly. "If I'm telling the truth," he replied, "dinner just saved your life." One corner of her mouth lifted, just barely. The pause fractured the hall into arguments. Not loud ones, those would have been uncivil, but tight, rapid exchanges carried on encrypted channels, flashing glyphs, and the sharp flicks of ears and tendrils. Instruments descended from the ceiling like curious insects, unfolding limbs and lenses, with an enthusiasm that felt slightly insulting given the circumstances. The human found himself escorted exactly nowhere, surrounded by guards who pointed weapons at him, with the weary irritation of professionals pulled into overtime. A technician approached the table, holding a scanner that buzzed irritably, as though it resented being asked to do its job. "The sample is complex," they said, adjusting the device. "It's adaptive, responds to metabolic profiles." "Of course it does," the human muttered. "Nothing ever wants to poison everyone equally." She watched from a short distance away, arms folded, long ears angled sharply forward. Her expression was calm, but the air around her felt charged, like a storm pretending to be polite. "Explain it to me," she said. The technician swallowed. "The compound remains inert until consumed by a specific genetic lineage. Once activated, it accelerates cellular collapse while releasing euphoric neurotransmitters. The subject experiences acceptance." The human winced. "That's one way to sell it." Murmurs spread. One noble scoffed. "An elegant end," they said. "A worthy tradition." She turned on them so quickly they flinched. "Tradition," she replied, "is not improved by adding murder and calling it poetry." The scanner chimed, flashing confirmation sigils. The hall reacted again, this time not with silence, but with disbelief so thick it felt like gravity. Someone laughed, sharp and hysterical. Another voice muttered that this was why ancient customs should come with footnotes. The human shifted his weight. "So," he said carefully, "am I still scheduled for execution or can I sit down?" A guard snorted before catching themselves. She glanced at the guard, then back at him. "You will stand," she said, "but you may relax your shoulders. You look like you're negotiating with your spine." He did gratefully. "Thank you. For what it's worth, this is the part where humans usually faint." "Restrain him," one of the robed figures demanded. "This discovery changes nothing. The right selects strength." She laughed then, not loud but unmistakable. "Strength," she said, "that requires secrecy and toxins is cowardice with better branding." The robed figure opened their mouth, then closed it as her ears swept back, razor still. The instruments continued to hum, recording treason with impeccable neutrality. She approached the table and looked down at the untouched dish. "This empire," she said quietly, "has hidden its fear inside ceremony." She turned to the human. "And you broke it with a shout and poor timing." He shrugged. "I've always had a talent for that." Her gaze held his for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "You will remain at my side," she said. "If this poison was meant for me, I want to know why." He blinked. "You realize that dramatically increases my odds of being assassinated, right?" "Yes," she replied. "But it also increases yours of surviving history." Somewhere in the hall, someone sighed and said, "This feast is officially ruined." The human smiled faintly. "Best review I've ever gotten." The hall did not return to celebration. It reorganized itself into something sharper. Tables retracted, folding away like embarrassed memories, while light bands along the walls shifted into analytical hues. The Empire's systems woke fully, processing betrayal at the speed of law. The human stood beside her now by unspoken agreement, which meant he was both protected and extremely visible, a position he had learned to distrust. Messages rippled through the air as holographic sigils, each one a demand, an accusation, or a request to pretend nothing unusual had happened. She ignored most of them. Her long ears moved constantly, tracking conversations faster than translators could keep up. "They are afraid," she said quietly, "and very annoyed." He leaned closer. "That's the emotional state right before humans invent paperwork." She glanced at him, one corner of her mouth lifting. "We already perfected that. You merely added forms." Security drones hovered nearer, their lenses whirring as they recalibrated threat models that now included a standing human with a talent for interruption. A council projection flared into existence, several figures speaking at once until she raised a hand. Silence followed immediately. "This right ends now," she said. "Its creators will be identified. Its defenders will explain themselves." A counselor bristled. "You would dismantle a pillar of our culture because of one outsider." She tilted her head. "I would dismantle it because it tried to kill me. The outsider merely noticed." The human coughed. "I notice lots of things. Usually right before trouble." Investigators moved through the hall, extracting data from the dish, the air, the walls themselves. The living architecture seemed offended, pulsing erratically as if resenting its role in the conspiracy. A technician muttered that the building had better secrets than most governments. No one disagreed. As names surfaced, panic spread. Some fled. Others argued that the poison was symbolic, that it had never failed, that it was an honor to die smiling. The human listened, baffled. "You know," he whispered to her, "we had a phase like that. It didn't end well." She nodded. "Most phases like that don't." When one accused official attempted to activate an escape node, she snapped an order. Gravity inverted locally, dropping them gently but humiliatingly onto the ceiling. The human blinked. "I really need to get one of those." "Earn an empire," she replied. Hours seemed to pass, though time was difficult to measure under shifting lights and rising consequences. At last she exhaled, a long, controlled release. "This will fracture the court," she said, "but it will not break us." He looked at her, truly looked. "You're taking a bigger risk than I did." "Yes," she said, "but you reminded me that survival without choice is just delayed extinction." A guard approached, hesitant. "What of the human?" She turned. "He lives," she said. "He speaks freely, and he eats last." The human frowned. "Hey." She smiled. "A joke," she said, "mostly." For the first time since he'd shouted, the hall felt lighter. Dangerous, furious, alive, but no longer pretending. And somehow, impossibly, he was still standing at the center of it. The hall emptied slowly, not in retreat but in recalibration. Delegations departed under new rules, old alliances quietly rewritten in transit. The living walls softened their pulse, returning to a rhythm that no longer felt complicit. Somewhere deep within the structure, systems purged ancient subroutines labeled *honor*, and the building seemed to sigh in relief. The human watched it all from a seat he had finally been allowed to occupy, mostly because his legs had begun to shake, and no one wanted him collapsing into history. She stood before the court one last time, long ears held high, voice carrying without amplification. The architects of the right were stripped of authority, not imprisoned but exposed, a punishment far worse in a society built on reverence. The poison was destroyed publicly, broken down at the molecular level and scattered into harmless elements. Someone joked that it was the most expensive soup ever made. No one laughed much, but the attempt mattered. When the hall cleared, silence settled, real silence this time. She turned to him. "You disrupted an empire," she said. "How do you feel?" He considered, hungry, also slightly taller emotionally. Her mouth curved. "You humans measure growth strangely. You should see our childhood charts." She walked with him through corridors that no longer bristled with suspicion. Guards nodded now instead of aiming. Drones ignored him completely, the highest compliment machines could offer. "You could leave," she said. "Your role here is complete." He stopped. The thought surprised him with how hollow it felt. "I know," he said. But if I do, someone else will eventually stand up and shout. They might not be as charming. She laughed softly. You are not charming. Ouch. You are inconvenient, she corrected, and necessary. They stood beneath a viewport where stars drifted past like scattered thoughts. Once, he would have been content to observe, to record and warn from a safe distance. Now he realized something had shifted. He had spoken and the universe had answered, not kindly but honestly. I used to think courage was loud, he said. Turns out it's just deciding not to sit down. Her ears angled toward him, thoughtful. And I believed authority meant inevitability. You reminded me it is a choice. A pause, then she extended a small, precise device. A formal position, she said. Advisor, disruptor, official complication. He took it, feeling its weight settle into his palm. Does it come with meals? Yes, she said, and fewer attempts on my life. High bar, he replied. As they walked back toward the light, the empire adjusted around them, imperfect but awake. He glanced once more at the stars and smiled. He had arrived as a witness. He would remain as a voice. And somewhere in the vast machinery of power that seemed to make all the difference,